recording. There we go. All right, cool. So if you could start with your name, your country, and then share a little bit about what you do back home.
Yeah, my name is Mina Jack Tolu. I'm from Malta, and I'm Maltese Italian, and I'm European, and I am a trans activist in Malta. I'm from Malta. I work also across Europe, but I am also a committee member of the European Green Party, which is a party of green parties from across EU and not only, but the rest of Europe as well. And together we come up with progressive and inclusive and forward-thinking policy for all of Europe. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Thank you. So a couple of questions about what you just shared. Well, one, how many political parties are there in Malta?
Malta currently has around five registered. Malta currently has around five registered political parties. It changes, it ebbs and flows, but our system is very similar to the British system, where you've got two parties which are such heavyweights that they dominate what the rest of the politics. So we've got the Nationalist Party, which is centre-right on a European scale, and the Labour Party, which is centre-left on the European scale, that are the dominant forces. To give you an example, it is estimated that together these parties spent over 7 million combined on their electoral campaigns for the last national elections, whereas the Green Party that I ran for, collectively, our individual candidate campaigns and our national party campaign, we spent around 10,000 euros.
Wow.
So it's a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
So there's the Green Party, Labour and Nationalist, and then there's Volt, which is a European party. By European party, we talk about a party that exists in the same way, with the same structures across various European countries. And they fight for a federalist Europe. And a number of inclusive, they're progressive. I'd put them around center left. The Green Party is center left to left, and then we've got the far right parties. And in Malta we've got two far right parties. We've got one which is more neo-fascist, or fascist, called Imperium Europa, and they only tend to run in European Parliament elections. And they've got a sort of counterpart that has changed in many forms over the past years, which is a sort of patriots movement, which are particularly a xenophobic, racist, anti-migration party, and they tend to run in local and national elections. But then there's also the Christian far right, so the extremist Christian parties that are primarily anti-women's rights, anti-human rights, anti-LGBTQ, also anti-vaccine, and they're running in national and European elections.
Interesting.
So but Labour and the Nationalists get they get 96% of the vote.
Oh wow! So on the local level, can you explain to me how the local government is constructed? Like how many, like for these different parties, do all of them have seated representation locally? No.
Our current parliament is having a majority of the Labour Party by around 9 to 11 seats.
Oh, okay.
We've got around
9 to 11.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact numbers.
And what's the population of Malta?
The population, the latest census from last year says our population is 519,000.
Oh, wow.
We do have a large migrant community.
Okay.
So the voting, the electoral register, I believe, was at around 340,000.
Okay.
The March elections.
Got it. Sorry to cut you off. So you said
No
the
worries.
Labour Party has like 9 to 11
It's got
seats?
like a 10 seat.
Got it.
Yeah, so, and the Nationalist Party is the other party.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been like this since my whole life. I'm
Wow.
30 years old. And the Nationalist Party was in power for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Labour will say, except for 6 months when they were in power. And the Labour Party has been in power since 2013.
Okay.
And they are very similar. There are big overlaps between the two parties in many of their approaches, particularly to economic policy.
Okay.
But in terms of the electoral system,
I think they're about to. Everybody's moving into this room. Okay. We could pick up in another space.
The political system where multiple voices are heard and represented is because we are a young republic.
Right.
Malta is a colonized nation, and we gained republic status in 1964 and independence in 1974.
Okay.
And we joined the European Union in 2004.
Who were the colonizers?
Well, the Brits. Of course. Malta was very strategic for them, particularly in the world wars, as a port for their navy. And then prior to the Brits, the Order of Knights called the Knights of St. John.
Okay.
And prior to them, the Spanish. And you just go back and back again.
You just kept getting handed off to new people.
So our political system is recent, and it was one that was introduced by the British. And we have something called a single transferable vote, which on paper mathematically is fantastic. However, our since the 80s they've been making tweaks and fixes to this system that kind of have dirtied it, muddied it, and therefore the way it's been implemented, we end up with a not truly representative parliament. In fact, the Green Party is now challenging the system in constitutional court in Malta and arguing that on the basis of our national percentage of votes, we deserve 1 seat in parliament. Right. And there's one seat worth of people, right? Around 2% of people in Malta who are not being represented and their voices aren't being heard.
And that's based off of voting data?
That's based off of voting data.
So it's only the two parties that have all the seats right now?
Yes. And then in local government, we've got 68 local councils.
Got it.
And they range from having 3 members on a local council to bigger ones which have maybe 10 or 12 members. Okay. And all of those are either led by the Nationalist Party or Labour Party. There is 1 independent councillor in Malta, and there are a couple of independent councillors in Gozo, which is our sister island, and that is it. Wow. There are no one from what we call the third parties, or what we call the small parties that are I think actually Steve Zamitlupi is the only independent councillor in Malta, and he's doing fantastic work in showing the necessity to have independent voices elected. But he got in on the last count.
Wow.
He had a solid campaign. He's a community guy. Right. He's connected to his local community, and they know him, and they elected him because they know he'll bring good. But so that's our system. It's a single transferable vote system. Is great on paper, but unfortunately it's not working for Malta. And we use the same system for our elections to the European Parliament. Right. The European Parliament has representatives from all the European Union member states. Right. There are 27 member states. There used to be 28 with the UK. Right. But obviously, post-Brexit, they have now left the European Parliament as well. And Malta has 6 seats in the European Parliament, whereas we're one of the smallest states. We are one of the smallest states in Europe, therefore we are represented by 6 seats. However, Germany is one of the biggest states, and they are represented by around 90 seats. Oh, wow. But actually, when you compare that to the population size, it means that one Maltese member of the European Parliament is representing around 100,000 people, whereas one German member of the European Parliament is representing around 1 million.
Oh, wow. Wow.
In the European Parliament, each country...
So they don't have standards for how much representation one member...
Well, the standard is that the minimum amount of seats a member state can have is 6. And therefore we have 6, but so does Cyprus, even though Cyprus has more citizens than we do. And so does Luxembourg, which is a similar sized country to us. We're all having 6 seats.
Is there a max to the number of people that any member of the European Parliament can
represent? I don't think so, but I think if you look at the Germans, the Italians, the French, they would be the ones who are representing the most in like a proportional way. Yeah, around 1 million.
And so, what is the difference in rulemaking at the EU level versus the national government level?
There are...
And then the council level.
Okay. The EU legislative level, we have the European Parliament, which is directly elected by European Union voters.
Okay.
In some countries that means all voters above 16 years old, like in Malta. In other countries the voting age is 18.
Okay.
In some countries that will include incarcerated people. In other countries it will not. In some countries it will include only some incarcerated people. In other countries it will include all of them.
Can incarcerated people vote in Malta?
It depends on their sentence.
Okay.
It depends on their crime that they have been sentenced for. Yes, so that's the European Parliament is the representation of the people. We've got 700. I believe now, when the UK was part of the European Parliament, there were 751 members of the European Parliament. That's for all of the EU, and I think it's around 728 at the moment. And they work together. Then there are, at the European Parliament, there are political groups, which bring together members together of the various political parties, because of course you might have a Green member of the European Parliament from Spain,
right,
and a Green member of the European Parliament from Italy,
right,
that get to work together,
right,
and so they join together in a Greens group,
right.
But the Greens group is also joined by pirate political parties, by Volt Europe, European Federalist Party, by...
Because it's the furthest left group?
No, the furthest left group is the left.
Okay.
They're called the left, and the Green United, like, GUE, they're called GUE NGL left. And they are the furthest left group.
Got it.
And then we have the Greens. And the Greens is Greens EFA group, so it's Greens and the European Free Alliance. The European Free Alliance is a group of parties that work on independence projects. So when the UK was part of the EU, members of the Scottish National Party that are fighting for the independence of Scotland were in the Greens EFA group. And then you've got the Socialists and Democrats, SND, that includes members of the Party of European Socialists, which includes the Labour Party in Malta, for example, but also includes other socialist parties or other centre-left parties or union parties. It also includes the Feminist Party in Sweden, for example. There are some countries that have really interesting political systems where you will have a party that is a one-issue party, like a feminist party. The left group includes parties like animal rights political parties, so it's a one-issue party on animal rights. Some of those join the Greens. The Greens have the Pirates, which are, and the Greens have the Greens and the European Free Alliance work together. The Greens have Volt, right? And then you've got the European People's Party. This is the biggest political party in the EU.
Okay.
This is the Nationalist Party is a member of the
European,
EPP.
Okay.
And the EPP holds the presidency of the European Parliament at the moment, and she's Roberta Metsola, a Maltese politician, a Maltese member of the European Parliament who has been elected not by the people, but by the member of European Parliament to be the president of the European Parliament. And then there is the ECR, which is the European, kind of the right. And then you've got the ID, which is Identity and Democracy, and they're the far right.
Okay.
And then you've got people who are not affiliated with anyone. So to give you an example of ID, we're talking about the politicians like Meloni and Salvini in Italy. They are arguing for pushbacks of migrants in the Mediterranean. They are the cause for a lot of racist and xenophobic language against migrants, refugees, and black people in Europe. And they partner with other political parties across Europe, like Vox in Spain, that are really pushing for fascist policies. And they're partnering with like Marine Le Pen in France. So these are the kind of parties that are on the right, on the far right, in the ID group.
Fascinating. So how, in general, do you feel about the EU's political structure and where it's at? Like the state of, let's say the state of democracy in Malta versus the state of democracy in the EU as a whole.
So the European Parliament is the only body in the EU that is elected by the people. The President of the European Parliament is not elected by the people. And the European Commission is indirectly elected by the people, because the national governments appoint a person to the European Commission that is going to be someone from their party.
Right.
So the majority party in a country is appointing a member to the Commission. And then you've got the European Council, which is indirectly led by the people, because it is the heads of state that meet.
Got it.
Now the European Council has a veto. Every member state has a veto. And therefore countries like Hungary and Poland are keeping us back in achieving more fundamental rights for people across the European Union, because they have a veto on certain legislation that is being proposed by the European Parliament.
So one member can veto?
Yeah, Orban from Hungary, Viktor Orban. I know that a lot of Americans are also starting to follow him.
Yeah.
He is essentially the Trump in Europe.
Right, yeah.
He can veto progressive legislation just because Hungary doesn't agree with it.
Wow.
And this is
Or
a
just
because
he doesn't agree with it.
Or just because he doesn't
Right.
agree with it. Hungary, but he'd be representing Hungary in there.
Right.
So we say it's the member state veto.
Right.
And
Fascinating.
small countries argue that the veto, small countries like Malta, argue that the veto is necessary to allow an equality between countries, regardless of the size of the country. Because
Right.
obviously Germany and France are the most powerful countries in the
right.
EU. Whereas progressive politicians, like from the Greens, are pushing for that veto to be abolished.
Right.
So these are the structures in the European Parliament. So it's democratic to an extent, right? And some people are indirectly elected that have a lot of power and say. However, I love the EU project. I think it has been fantastic in bringing together so many different cultures, languages, people, and it's brought a lot of good, I see, to Malta. It's why we have LGBT laws that we have now. Maltese democracy, there's such a long way to go. Our constitution needs to be updated to reflect, a nation that has now, how many years after becoming independent? Well, since the 70s,
Yeah, what you say, 72?
74, yeah.
74?
Yeah. And the Organization for...
Not to be confused with America's democracy, which was established also in the 70s. It was just 1770.
That's so intense for me. I mean, yeah, it's
Could you
something
imagine?
else. Something else.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of structures we're talking about. And unfortunately, Maltese politics, I could message someone right now and get the number of the aide to the Prime Minister.
Right.
Right? We're so close-knit.
Right.
Anyone could go and knock on their elected representative's office and be able to speak directly to them. But it also means that you create a system that is rife for corruption.
Right, yeah.
And kickbacks and setbacks. Kickbacks. Politicians in their campaigns promise all sorts of things. They call you. They ask, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything you need? and you can say, yes, a washing machine, and they'll bring you a washing machine.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? Do you need a lift to the polls? Yes, absolutely, and they'll come and give you a lift to the polls.
Wow.
And Malta has a 90% voter turnout.
Wow.
And unlike other countries like Belgium, it is not compulsory.
Right.
So there's a huge engagement in politics.
Compulsory.
Compulsory.
Does that mean like mandatory? Like
Mandatory
you have to
voting
vote? Yeah.
in Belgium, yeah.
I didn't know that. So Belgium, you have to vote.
You have to vote.
Got it. And you also mentioned to me off the video that if you're an EU citizen and you're living in another EU member state, you can vote on the local elections in that state.
Yeah.
And you can also vote for your elections back home.
Yeah.
In the same election cycle.
Yeah.
And you can vote, obviously. Can you vote for the members to represent the EU also in both elections?
No, you choose one.
Okay.
You have to declare which one.
Okay.
I'm a Maltese citizen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also an Italian citizen. I have
Mm-hmm.
dual citizenship. I can vote in Maltese and Italian referenda.
Mm-hmm.
I can vote on Maltese and Italian national parliament.
Mm-hmm.
I am a resident of San Juan in Malta, and I can vote for that local council.
Wow.
And as a Maltese Italian, I can choose whether to vote for the Italian or Maltese lists for the European Parliament. I choose the Maltese one because, we're 100,000 people per member, whereas
Right.
the Italians is around 1 million.
Right.
I've got more contact with them.
Right.
And I lived in Berlin for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I voted for the local council in my district in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And while living in Berlin, if there would have been a European Parliament election while I was there, I could have chosen between voting for the German list, the Italian list, or the Maltese list. So that's how it is. That freedom of movement to travel between the states allows you to register to vote there for your local representative, but also for your European representative.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I think I think change takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think change requires so much work that no one actually sees.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many political movements that are growing, that are fighting, that are organizing, and unfortunately in Europe we see a strong unity of the far right,
Mm-hmm.
but not as such a strong unity on the left.
Yeah.
In some countries, like Italy, they have elections really soon now in 2022. This means that the far right has more chances of getting power.
Yeah.
And this is concerning.
Yeah,
so
that
we
is.
need to keep up the fight, but we also need to seek connections with others and compromises with those closest to us. We can't compromise on our values.
Right.
Right? I'll never compromise. I'll never. Yeah, I won't. Talk with intolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I can find compromises on some economic policies.
Right.
Or some other policies that, in order to create a unity that's needed to ensure that the politics remains progressive.
I love that. All right, right on.
Great. Thank you.
Nice.